Hi, everyone. Welcome to the March 10th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host, Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to recap last weekend's stakes racing, topped by those three Derby preps, the San Felipe out in California, the Tampa Bay Derby at Tampa Bay Downs, and the Grade 3 Gotham at Aqueduct. We'll also talk about all of the undercard stakes races on those cards from California, Florida, and New York, some of the top older horses in action last week on both the dirt and the turf as well. We'll finish up the show by going to Gulfstream Park to talk about a stakes from there, and Oaklawn Park, where they ran an Oaks prep this past weekend. Craig, though, let's start off the show, and I wasn't initially going to start it this way, but seems like last weekend's racing happened so long ago after yesterday when this news came out about these FBI federal indictments against two of the top claiming trainers in the game, Jason Service and Jorge Navarro. What was your reaction to yesterday's news?
You know, it was kind of mixed. I was a little bit sad, but I also think it can turn out to be a good thing. I don't think any of us were really surprised. If we were, we probably had our head in the sand. As a guy who makes speed figures, I've commented many times about exploits that didn't seem to make a lot of sense with new acquisitions of horses, particularly from these two trainers. So I wish I could say I was surprised. And with said, you called them claiming trainers, and that is basically how both of them started. But they've both kind of risen up near the top of the game. They have grade 1 wins. They have lots of big horses. Of course, Maximum Security, many people thought were the best, is probably the best horse in the game. We'll see now how it works if the accusations turn out to be true and he was being doped. But, you know, overall, like I said, just mixed reaction. I think it could be a good thing long term, but it is a little disheartening currently.
Yeah, it's a good day and a bad day for the sport. It's a bad day in the sense that it's more poor publicity for the racing industry, which after the past couple of years, I know a lot of people feel like we don't need any more of that. But it's a good day in the sense that if you're a bettor, if you're a handicapper, if you're a racing journalist, if you're an owner that has horses with a trainer that you know is clean, it's a good day for the sport, because it's just incredibly frustrating to have to deal with these trainers who, as you said, everyone who's involved in the game, who follows it closely, has strong suspicions that something was going on, even if you couldn't put your finger on exactly what it was, even if you didn't know exactly which drugs were being administered. Something had to be going on, because you just don't see trainers winning at 40, 50%, winning off the claim with the types of horses that they do. And I call these guys claiming trainers because that's typically where we see these types of shenanigans going on, or historically we have at the claiming level. And the part of this that I think people find so offensive is just the gall of these two trainers to employ these methods at the top level of the game in grade 1 races. I mean, with horses that turned out to be champions. You brought up Maximum Security. I mean, I voted for him for champion 3-year-old because it's kind of what you had to do. The horse's accomplishments were the horse's accomplishments. I couldn't make up evidence that I didn't have in my hands, as nobody could. I mean, it made sense to vote for the horse. He was the obvious choice based on what he did on the track. But now, looking back, everything has an asterisk next to it. I mean, I'm sure there were horses that put forth performances last year that were not named in the indictments. But I mean, everything is tainted at this point. I mean, Chancelot's near track record in the Amsterdam. I mean, we talked about that at the time, how it seemed like a super equine performance, something that horses just weren't capable of anymore. And it's just what I will say is, moving forward, it's going to be easier to talk about this stuff, because I think one of the reasons that a lot of fans got frustrated, even with people like us going back in the past couple of years, is that we wanted to be realistic in saying that we were skeptical, but we also wanted to be responsible in not saying that these trainers had broken the rules without evidence. And now we have that evidence. So I think it's going to be easier for all of us to talk about this as we move forward from this. And we'll see what developments come out of this story moving forward, because if you read those indictments, and they're quite a read, it wouldn't be surprising if there's more to come.
Yeah, and the one last point I want to make is I read all the indictments, like I'm assuming you did, and the biggest thing that comes out of for me is these guys were abusing horses, and that's a thing that we just can't have in this sport, because if there's one thing that will kill it faster than anything, it would be animal abuse, and that's clearly what happened here. So I'm really hoping these guys get punished to the fullest extent of the law if they're found guilty, and that the game really cleans itself up and just starts doing a better job, because you just can't have the animals being injured or hurt, or in some cases even killed, as we saw. So hopefully it's a good day. There's going to be some tough days going forward as people talk about it and address everything that happened, and invariably some more news is going to come out. I'm sure that I've already seen trainers who are getting their horses scratched who were not in the indictment. So time will tell. Let's just hope it's kind of a Black Monday that turns into a good day as time goes on.
And we should just note that these are, at this point, still just indictments. These trainers have not been convicted of any crimes yet. But, I mean, an indictment basically means that there is credible evidence against these trainers. And if you read the indictments, the evidence is not just credible, it's pretty overwhelming. So I think it's fair for us to talk about this in the way that we have. And yeah, we'll monitor this moving forward and see what more comes out of this. But I thought it would be good of us to start off the show by addressing that issue. Let's move into the racing now, and we'll talk about those Derby preps from the past weekend. We'll begin off the top with all three of them, so we talk about these horses in a cluster. We'll begin out in California with that San Felipe Stakes, won by the undefeated Authentic for Bob Baffert. We had both been a little bit skeptical of him coming into this race because he hadn't really gotten a class test yet. He had faced some pretty favorable pace scenarios in his two starts coming into this. He certainly got a test here because he faced some legitimate competition. The pace of this race was certainly honest, and he just turned them all away. I mean, Honor AP took that shot at him at the top of the stretch. He opened up on that horse, and he certainly got the mile and the 16th distance. So I think it's fair to say at this point he shoots right up to the top of the Drury leaderboard.
He does. He got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure, which is right up there. I can't remember if it's the top. Tiz the Law might have got a 121. I don't remember a point here or there off the top of my head, but it's right at the top. He certainly looked like a new racehorse to my eye. I mean, he was obviously really talented the first couple times we saw him, but this time he was professional. He ran straight through the lane. He ran fast, as you said. The pace figures weren't crazy fast. There's no red in our past performances, but he ran a 130 to the half mile. I do have a little concern that he was, slowing down late. It was only a 117 at the wire. Given his breeding, mile and a quarter, I don't think it's a given, but he didn't do anything wrong on Saturday. And we've seen horses carry speed further than their breeding indicates. So for me, solid horse, and I want to see what he does. I assume he's going to go in the Santa Anita Derby next. Honor AP ran a very nice race off the layoff. We hadn't seen him since October when he, I believe, broke his maiden. He had two nice performances, but he got a 115 as the runner-up. If you want to think maybe he was a little short and wasn't really cranked up for this one, and bigger goals are down the line, I could see thinking he could turn the tables next time, given a little more distance and a little more fitness.
Yeah, I have the same questions as you about Authentic's distance capabilities. I mean, at this point in time, there aren't too many horses that are truly bred to go a mile and a quarter, a mile and a half. But Authentic really does have more of that miler's pedigree. His dam was a brilliant horse. She only ran a couple times during her career, but she really showed a lot of speed going 7 furlongs to a mile. Authentic definitely got this distance. We'll see if more distance is going to be an issue for him. He might just have the raw talent to take him the distance. We'll see. But I liked what I saw from him. I freely admit that I was skeptical. My skepticism of this horse was unfounded because he really stepped up to the plate here and ran a much faster race. I liked Honor AP's effort. I think first start back off the layoff. This was a good showing for him. He's likely to move forward from here. He does have a pedigree that indicates more distance is probably not going to be a big issue for him. And I agree. Storm the Court, he took the kind of step forward that you wanted to see out of him. He just ran into a couple of horses that are a little better right now. But I thought this was a good progression for Storm the Court. He's probably not going to reclaim his crown as the best of this division right now. But he's definitely in the mix because he's running as fast as many other horses that we've been seeing. So I think this was the strongest prep of the weekend from my perspective, and arguably the strongest prep that we've seen anywhere so far this year. So I'll be very interested to see how these horses do moving forward.
Yeah, my one concern with Storm the Court is he does seem like a horse who, unless he makes the lead, he hasn't done a whole lot. So he's going to have to get that new dimension because he's not that fast where he can just go to the front. He doesn't really like to pass horses at this point, so I'd like to see a little of that. Obviously, the big stinker in the race was 1,000 Words, who came in. I think he went off the second choice. Him and Honor AP were pretty close, but he just packed it up pretty early. He didn't even, by the time they hit the stretch, he was obviously finished. I haven't read if they found anything wrong with him, but it was clearly just a bad race, and interesting to hear if something happened or he just didn't run.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. The two horses that came out of that Los Alamitos Futurity, 1,000 Words and Ano Dor, their prospects have just tanked recently with both of them with inexplicably poor efforts in their last races. I don't know if that race was just not as strong as it seemed at the time because 1,000 Words didn't come out of it to win a race, perhaps against some suspect competition, but we'll see, although he just was not on the same level as those top three that we just talked about. So we'll see if there was some excuse or if he can rebound at his next start. Let's move down to Florida to talk about that Tampa Bay Derby. And this one was the upset of the weekend as King Guillermo made that turf to dirt move that's becoming pretty popular on this Derby trail to win this race at nearly 50-1 odds. There was a fast pace predicted by the pace projector, and we talked about it on the forecast last week that maybe this race was one where the pace wouldn't really develop in the way that some people thought it might. We thought because perhaps King Guillermo, who was shown on the lead, wouldn't have the speed that he'd shown on the turf on the dirt. Well, he did have that speed. He was up there stalking the pace the entire way. They just weren't going that fast. And he just shut the door on this field in the stretch and earned a pretty respectable speed figure for a horse that won at 50-1.
Yeah, he sure did. That's I kind of put that out on Twitter. Despite the fact he paid $100 to win, he was a horse who ran a really solid race. He got a 119 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort. I don't think there was anything fluky about it. He broke well from his outside post. He got a good position. The pace was, I would say, moderate. It wasn't fast or slow. He's going to have to deal with a lot faster if he advances onto the Triple Crown, almost assuredly. But, you can't knock the effort. He ran big. He had shown plenty of speed. I think we actually had him predicted to lead the race on the pace projector, which is kind of odd for a turf horse. But, he turned the tables on Sol Volante, who had beat him on turf back in his 2-year-old season. Sol Volante ran just okay. He came in. He had won his race last time with a 113 TimeformUS speed figure. He got a 112 this time. I don't think there was a whole lot to say about the trip. It looked pretty clean. He saved a lot of ground. He's just a horse who maybe he's not quite good enough. I think we both freely admitted he got a dream trip of life last time, sitting behind just a really fast pace and just getting through just an easy win that day, given the setup that he didn't quite get here. So he seems a horse to me who's okay, but he's just a little bit pace dependent.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that this was a race that didn't really suit horses with a closing running style because the first, third, and fourth place finishers were just 1, 2, 3 throughout. And Sol Volante was the only horse that made up a significant amount of ground from the back of the pack. So I'll give him credit for that. But as you said, he didn't really move forward at all off his last race. If anything, he took a slight step backwards here. And maybe he's just not quite fast enough to be in that upper echelon of Derby contenders, even though he does have some ability. It should be noted both he and the winner came out of what's turning out to be a very live pulpit stakes from last fall at Gulfstream Park on the turf. Plenty of turf horses have been excelling on this Derby trail, so we'll see what these two do from here. The others in this race, I don't have a whole lot to say about. Chance It was a big disappointment. He just didn't seem to get the distance. He was in position at the top of the stretch, but just went backwards from there. The others were coming out of maiden races. Some of them stepped forward. Texas Swing ran okay, but they're going to have to do better to be successful on the Derby trail in the preps to come.
Yeah, the one thing I'll say about, and I do the same thing at times where I look through these races and say, oh, he was the only closer to do something. And I'm sure you did this, but you also have to look at who the horses were in the back. And in this case, I just don't think there was a whole lot of quality back there. So I'm not surprised none of the others really made a run.
I do not disagree with that. The final Derby prep we'll talk about from the past weekend is perhaps the one that'll have the least implications on the Kentucky Derby. That all remains to be seen. But that was the one-turn mile, the Gotham on Saturday at Aqueduct. And no surprise that the favorite, Mischievous Alex, won this race, collecting his third stakes victory in a row. The one-turn mile just seems like it's a perfect distance for this horse. You knew he was going to run a big race when he broke so sharply out of the gate. Kendrick Carmouche had a ton of options down the backstretch. He tucked him into what might be an awkward position for some horses, about a half length back in between rivals, but he easily moved up to take the lead on the far turn, and it was just over from that point forward.
It was. He got a 118 TimeformUS speed figure, so we kind of had very similar races from the winners of all three of our Derby preps within 2 points of each other. But as you say, just being a one-turn mile, I think we saw a couple good horses in Mischievous Alex and Untitled, but I don't think these are really horses that should be progressing. I wouldn't want to see them in the wood. They look like more like one-turn types to me that could have really good careers, because I think they're both very nice horses, especially with obviously Mischievous Alex has the results, but Untitled, he's still only won one race, eligible for a non-winners of one, but he's run very good every time out. So I do look forward to seeing where these show up and hoping personally that they show up in 7 furlong and 1 mile races.
Yeah, I agree with that. Untitled in particular seems like a horse that they've rushed along quite a bit, and I wouldn't be disappointed at all if they targeted some lesser races like, I don't know if there's a sprint race coming up, but there's certainly the Pat Day Mile on Derby Day that seems like it will be a good fit for a horse like that. Even the winner of this race, Mischievous Alex, I'm sure they'll take a shot in a race like the Wood Memorial and just see what their Derby prospects are, because they haven't really put him in a tough two-turn race yet. That's fair enough. But if that doesn't work out, you'd hope they put this horse back in one-turn races, because he obviously does have a lot of talent going that 7 furlong to a mile distance. Again, this is a race where I don't have a whole lot to say about the others. Kind of like the Tampa Bay Derby, it was a race that was dominated towards the front end, although I don't think the pace of this race was necessarily slow. I just think the closers like Attachment Rate and Montauk Traffic just turned out to not be quite good enough. They took steps forward. They just didn't step forward enough to get on terms with the classy winner of this race, Mischievous Alex. All right, let's move on to those undercard stakes from those races we just discussed. And we'll stay at Aqueduct to begin with the Busher. It was supposed to be one of the Kentucky Oaks preps that was run on Saturday. We'll see if this race actually does produce any Oaks starters, because these fillies didn't run that fast. And this is another race that produced a pretty massive upset for the top 3 positions, as the 2 favorites in this race, Lake Avenue and Maidens, they just didn't show up at all. You could perhaps give Lake Avenue the excuse of contesting a fast pace. Maidens was just out of sorts from the start. She was under a ride on the backstretch and never had anything. So this race was dominated by long shots, and Water White got the trip. She was far back early, or as far back as you could be in this race, towards the back of the pack, steadily advanced, and basically the race just kind of fell in her lap in the late stages, as Kansas Kiss, who had taken the lead very early at the quarter pole, just got leg weary in the final stages.
Yeah, this was a race that definitely collapsed from a figure standpoint. The early pace figures are all in red. Lake Avenue ran the half mile in a 1:35, and the final time only wound up at 99. So it is a race that's set up for the closers, and you can see that just looking at the top 3. So if you want to give Lake Avenue a bit of an excuse off this, 3-month layoff, I guess it was, maybe she'll have more coming back. But with the others, I do think it's a case of they just kind of got the setup. They're okay. Water White got a 101. Kansas Chris was up closer to the pace, actually led after 3/4 of a mile, got a 104, and then it was a gap back to the rest. So I don't think the Busher was a particularly strong race, but I don't know that that's all that surprising, especially when you consider that Lake Avenue just didn't bring her A game.
Yeah, I will say, forgetting about the Kentucky Oaks for a second, I do really want to highlight the performance of Kansas Kiss because she ran quite a race here. She was last down the backstretch, which turned out to be the right spot to be given how fast they were moving for that first quarter mile. And I don't know what came over her rider, but he just I guess got it in his head that he wanted to be closer to the pace. And she started moving at about the 5/8 pole. She advanced between horses. She was basically taking over the lead before they got to the quarter pole. I don't know what the plan was there, but she ran a remarkable race just in the context of it to still hold on for second and only lose by a nose. And the speed figures reflect that. She got a TimeformUS speed figure that's 3 points higher than Water White. I'm not saying at all that she's a Kentucky Oaks kind of filly. She's probably a sprinter. But I just thought of all the horses that we saw in this race, she's the one that I would want moving forward.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And I think it's worth watching the allowance race she comes out of. It was a race won by Elchester Cheetah, who had actually shipped in as a Maryland filly who had shipped in from racing at Charlestown and won a race at Aqueduct. And I suspect that's going to turn out to prove to be a pretty strong allowance race. That could be a key race going forward.
Yeah, it's a figure that I was a little surprised when I saw at the time. I was surprised the race came up as fast as it did, but it might just be a strong race because Kansas Kiss certainly validated it. One race before the Busher at Aqueduct on Saturday, they ran the Grade 3 Tom Fool, and the likable 4-year-old Colt Mind Control picked up another graded stakes win in New York. This is going to set him up perfectly for the Grade 1 Carter next month as he looks to collect his third consecutive Grade 1 victory, I should say, his third Grade 1 victory in a 7-furlong race in New York to go along with his scores in the Hopeful as a 2-year-old and the H. Allen Jerkins as a 3-year-old. It's just easy to like Mind Control. He runs from anywhere, and he seems to always show up.
He does, and visually, this was the most surprising result to me of the day because I thought he had no chance when they turned for home. I thought he was going to maybe clunk up, get second. I didn't think anybody was catching Happy Farm, but he just found another gear at a distance that's probably, I would say not even probably, it is not his best distance. I think he wants a little more ground. He just kept coming, and man, that was some run through the lane. He got a 120 TimeformUS speed figure. His final time was a 123, which for him, I think, is probably a better reflection of how well he ran. Happy Farm ran decent. He got a 124 for the effort. Who knows what we'll get from him next time. I think he is a Jason Service horse, if I'm not mistaken. But I'm looking forward to see what Mind Control can do. I think he's a really good one-turn horse, and he's capable of being a Grade 1 winner. He's a horse that can easily get back to being a Grade 1 winner off this kind of performance. I mean, I agree. I thought that Happy Farm might be home when they got to the top of the stretch because the pace of this race, they came home pretty quickly, but they weren't moving that fast, or at least around the far turn to the half-mile pole. They went the half in over 46 seconds. And throughout the day at Aqueduct, it's not like we saw horses flying through the lane. I mean, if anything, a lot of the come-home times at Aqueduct have been on the slower side. And I was looking up the Trackus figures for this race just to see how quickly Mind Control actually did run his final quarter. And Trackus got it in 23.46 seconds, which at Aqueduct over a pretty dead strip, that's pretty remarkable. And it's just a testament to how game Mind Control is, how versatile he is, because he runs a lot of his best races from a stalking position up close to the pace, but he's also shown in this race and races like the Allen Jerkins, he can close from farther back in the pack. So just a really cool horse to have in the barn, and a horse that is as effective going 6 furlongs as he is going about a 1-turn mile. So I'll be looking forward to seeing him in the Carter next month. I don't have a whole lot to say again about the other two that finished second and third. They both are sent out by trainers who were named in those indictments from last week, or I should say from yesterday. Happy Farm in particular is a horse that was a mid-level claimer not that long ago, and now he's a graded stakes horse. So that's been the story of a lot of the horses in Jason Service's barn. Yeah, I did want to ask, just how much did you bet on Bone Raison? Because he took – I'm just kidding. I know he was your selection, and he actually ran well given the situation. But, man, I'm sure you never expected 4-1, and he took quite a hit late.
You know, one of the reasons that I'm going to like seeing some of these trainers that improve their horses getting out of things is because it's something that you see quite often with these late odds changes, horses that are live for seemingly inexplicable reasons. I mean, it's certainly not because I liked the horse, and it's certainly not because I bet a lot on the horse. Trust me, I did not bet that much on this horse. It's hard to make a horse like him coming off a bunch of off the board finishes. The 4-1 in this race. I thought 8-1 might be as low as I would go on him. So that was surprising. He did run well though, and Bon Raison's an admirable horse, and he has been an admirable horse for prior trainers. So I'll be interested to see how he runs for whoever ends up getting him. I'm still a fan of Bon Raison, but it was surprising late odds change on that horse. Perhaps the most, well, I should say not the most impressive, but the fastest performance that we saw at Aqueduct on Saturday was turned in by Diamond King, who's just a really admirable one-turn horse, kind of like Mind Control, even though he's not a Grade 1 winner. Diamond King has certainly earned some speed figures that suggest he might be able to ascend to that level because he's just been a little unlucky to lose a lot of these races, and they've run him in some distances that really aren't ideal for him. I think he perhaps put forth his best effort last year in the Charlestown Classic around 3 turns. That's going to be difficult for a horse like Diamond King. But when they put him in these mile races, especially going to 1 turn, he's just really tough to beat.
Yeah, he is. We talked about him on the forecast that he was a horse that clearly had the best figures in the race coming in. He just needed to put it all together. And I know you said you liked the 1 turn for him much better than the 2, and he backed it up. I thought he was game. He got challenged late by American Anthem, who also ran very well for Danny Gargan. And this was a solid effort, a 125 TimeformUS speed figure for Diamond King, 123 for American Anthem. And I thought that the top 2 just ran really well and have every right to move on. And, it wouldn't shock me if we saw these horses show up in the Met Mile eventually.
No, I agree with that. And in the immediate future, I would imagine that we're going to see these horses from the Stymie and the Tom Fool converge in a race like the Carter, because Diamond King, he's certainly been successful going sprint distances in the past, even if they haven't tried it in a while. And, there aren't that many Grade 1 races for these older horses, especially in 1-turn races. So I think John Service should strongly consider running Diamond King and turning it back to face a horse like Mind Control in the Carter. It seems like a perfect spot for him. We'll see what they end up doing. But these horses are certainly fast enough to compete at that higher level. The disappointment of this race, I guess, was Wicked Trick, whose 6-race winning streak got snapped for Linda Rice. A mile, I know we ran that big figure going a mile last time. I still think he's a little more of a sprinting type, though he couldn't quite class up against these horses. I imagine Linda will set her sights a bit lower in the future.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see. He did have a little setback and was scratched out of that Laurel Stakes at General George, so maybe he needed some time. But when you see it's Linda Rice and they're in the entry box, I think she was expecting his best effort. So I'm with you. He probably needs a step back, but I wouldn't totally write him off just yet.
I was initially going to have us discuss the big figure turned in by Chateau in a Friday allowance race at Aqueduct, but that kind of seems pointless now given who trains him and given the way he improved for this trainer. So we can skip right over that and move over to the West Coast, Santa Anita, where on that San Felipe undercard, well, I shouldn't say undercard, the San Felipe was an undercard stakes race to the Santa Anita Handicap. And this Santa Anita Handicap, not one of the great big caps that we've seen. The race definitely got much weaker when Gift Box was scratched on the morning of the race with a setback. So Midcourt inherited the favorites role. Midcourt is an admirable horse. He was coming off an impressive win in the San Pasquale. He just didn't quite get the 1.25 mile distance. And somewhat surprisingly, the horse that did get the distance was Combatant in his second start for John Sadler.
Yeah, this one surprised me. I proclaim John Sadler is probably the greatest trainer ever to be able to get Combatant to win the Santa Anita Handicap. He's a horse I've seen run at Remington and at Oaklawn, and I mean, he's a solid enough horse, but I didn't expect this. But that said, the race got a 121 TimeformUS speed figure. The best figure was Combatant on top. And, I mean, that's just terrible for a Grade 1 older males, I'm going to be honest, let alone a Grade 1 the stature of the Santa Anita Handicap. This race has been really impacted by this year, the Saudi Cup, the upcoming Dubai Classic World Cup. So, I mean, this is a Grade 1 in name only. Figure-wise, it was a Grade 3, and even that might be being kind.
Yeah, I mean, the real story here, I think, is John Sadler and Ronas Racing, who I think were winning this race for the 3rd year in a row after accelerating Gift Box the last couple of years. And they just have a real knack for acquiring horses that they can do well with. Combatant was previously with Steve Askerson, had always shown some ability on turf, on dirt, and shorter races. Never thought he was this kind of horse. But as you said, it wasn't a real Grade 1 race from a quality standpoint. So he's probably not going to be a Grade 1 horse moving forward. Multiplier, who was second, kind of the same thing. I don't think he had won a stakes race since the 2017 Illinois Derby. So not a great accomplishment beating him. And mid-court will probably do better turning back in distance. But yeah, just not the strongest race. We did see one of your favorite horses in action in the Kilroe Mile a little earlier in the day at Santa Anita on Saturday, as River Boyne got his second win in a row after taking a stakes there last month. And a horse who seemed to be plagued by bad luck and poor trips all throughout 2019. He's now gotten 2 perfect trips in a row, and he's put forth 2 stakes victories.
He has, and somebody asked me what I think about him now on Twitter, and I just did the waving the white flag emoji. I'll concede he's put it all together. He's looked very good these last 2 times. He's run professionally. He's got clean trips, and he got the job done. He won last time with a 120 TimeformUS speed figure. Saturday he got a 121. So solid enough number. I think it's a Grade 2 race. Not great. He's not going to move up and win Grade 1s with these kind of numbers. And I actually do think he got a pretty favorable trip. The pace was a little on the slow side early, but he was able to run down Got Stormy, who had opened up a lead, and it was a good sign that she rebounded from that poor effort at Tampa. As a handicapper, I'm going to look at the horses that were 3rd and 4th again. I know we both like True Valor in this race. I don't think it was an ideal trip for him. I think there's more in the tank, and the closely bunched finish tells you there were probably some trips that impacted the results, but all credit to River Boyne. He's got that early speed, and he gets good position, at least lately, and is able to take advantage of it.
And the Kilroe is still a Grade 1 race, so River Boyne, he did get this Grade 1 victory here. River Boyne's now a Grade 1 winner. But as you were saying, I mean, the speed figures he's ran in the last couple of starts, they're kind of the same figures he's always been running, even when he was losing these races. It just wasn't the toughest Grade 1 race overall. I mean, the classiest horse in here was Got Stormy, and credit to Got Stormy. She did get back to some of her better efforts. This was a big step up off her disappointing return at Tampa. So she ran her race. She just got cut down by some nice older horses. And that's the same thing that might have happened to her last year. Aside from that freakish effort in the 4-star Dave, I mean, it's not like this performance was that much worse than her Woodbine Mile. So Got Stormy, I think she's back at this point. And as you were saying, the closers maybe are the horses you want out of this race. The one that I thought was really impressive was the number 4, Next Shares, who was 3rd in this race. He was the one who had no right to do well at the end, and he almost won the race because he was towards the back of the pack, and he actually had to move wide around the far turn. He was spun about 4 wide for the final part of the far turn coming into the stretch, and he sustained that momentum and almost got there at the end. He's a horse that is pretty inconsistent. You don't always know what you're going to get from Next Shares, but when he's good, he's pretty good, and he was good on this day. A little earlier in the day at Santa Anita, they ran the Grade 2 San Carlos, going 7 furlongs, and Flagstaff, again, for John Sadler and Ronis Racing, got the job done here as the short-priced, even money favorite. Just a horse that seems to be hitting his best stride now as a 6-year-old.
He does. He got a 120 for the win, which we've talked about him before. That's basically what he always runs. He got a nice setup here. The pace was fast. We have the half-mile coated in red. He did lose some ground, but in this situation, the way the pace was, I think that was probably the way to go. I do find it interesting, these Santa Anita dirt races. We're used to seeing bigger figures out west, especially on dirt, not so much on turf. But we're not really getting that this year. This race only was a 120, and I think a part of that's the troubles that were out at Santa Anita last year. A lot of horses that shipped out. We're seeing a lot of horses showing up at Oaklawn, at other places around the country, and I think it's had an impact on the quality of racing out west.
No, I think that's really fair. It's something that we've been seeing for the past year. But yeah, a Flagstaff. I was kind of surprised to see this was just his 3rd graded stakes attempt, because I feel like we've been seeing him in these races for longer than that, but I guess he's been in a lot of allowance races. Yeah, he's just a horse that it's nice to see him staying in training because he's pretty good right now. Is he really a Grade 1 type of sprinter? I kind of doubt it. But he is in the best form of his career. Roadster, who was 2nd. just more of the same with Roadster, not really delivering him that potential that he showed early last year. I don't know what the right distance for him is. There was a time when I thought he was a one-turn kind of horse based on this performance. I don't know. He wasn't that impressive. I just think Roadster might not be as good as a lot of people hoped he was.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He's just not been particularly fast. He was terrible last time around 2 turns, and his best races have come at 1 turn. So maybe that is his best distance, and he's just not that good.
Now, I think the news yesterday that kind of diverted people's attention away from the racing maybe spared you from some of people's outrage at the figure that Gamine might have gotten in this 6th race at Anita last Saturday, because this felt like one of those horses, kind of like Nadal's debut for Baffert a couple months ago, where people are already hailing this first-time starter for Bob Baffert as one of his best horses. There was certainly a story about this first-time starter before she had made her debut in this Saturday maiden race. I was looking at the DRF Clocker reports coming in, and her last 2 workouts have been rated an A-, which you just don't see for first-time starters. I watched a couple on XBTV. She's an impressive mover, and she's a really nice-looking filly. She wasn't beating anything in this maiden race, to say the least. Only 4 horses were drawn to the field. She easily beat those 3. The pace of this race was fairly slow. I just want to highlight this because this is a Bob Baffert horse that he's spoken very highly of. He's mentioned that she could be a potential superstar, and she started her career off the right way.
She did. She got a 104 TimeformUS speed figure. The final time was actually a 110. It got knocked down a little bit. Well, not just a little bit. It got knocked down a full 6 points because that's how slow the pace was. But personally, when I see this horse come back, the figure's not going to mean a whole bunch for her. Looked really good. I'm not one to always say, we talk about it often, that she had more in the tank, but she had more in the tank, in my opinion. There's some good fillies out west. We've talked about some of the weak divisions, but the 3-year-old fillies have been pretty strong with Donna Veloce, Bast, who unfortunately is injured, and some others. So it won't be easy if she stays out west, but it was a good effort. Now I'll be curious to see who she shows up against, if she stays at Santa Anita or goes to Oaklawn or somewhere else. But obviously a talented filly, and I'm not going to put a whole lot of stock in that number she ran.
Yeah, I agree with that. They obviously weren't trying to fully exert her in this race. She was never really asked for her best, and we don't really know what her best is at this point. I also don't know what her best distance is going to be. She's another one of these daughters of Into Mischief. It seems like you can breed Into Mischief to anything and get a near champion these days, because the damn side of Gamine's pedigree is nothing to write home about. She's the dam's a half sister to some pretty cheap New York breds, a family that I know quite well. And yeah, she's certainly the best of that female side. So we'll see what she does from here. A 3-year-old filly who has already proven herself is one that we saw on Sunday in the Grade 3 Santa Ysabel, going 1 mile and 16th for those 3-year-old fillies. And Donna Veloce, who competed in the Breeders' Cup Juvenile Fillies last year, made her return to the races here. I think this was her first start since finishing, I believe, right behind Bast in the Starlet last year. And she got back on track with a good effort, overcame a stumbling start, and rated and won well.
Yeah, she did. She looked really good. It was a quick pace in here. There were some horses coming out of sprint races. The runner-up, Speech, had run a really good race last time with a 106. But she did this professionally. She got a 111 TimeformUS speed figure for the effort. Just I don't think they could have asked for much more. I would assume Simon Callahan has to be pleased with what he saw. The number looks good, and I think she's a filly who is definitely going to advance and be a factor going on.
Yeah, we talked about it last year. She's a filly that's certainly bred to go longer distances on the dam side. And she's by Uncle Mo, who gets any kind of runner. And I like that she's showing more versatility as she gains experience. She rated really well in this race. She overcame that adversity at the beginning. And I just think she's moving in the right direction. And it probably wouldn't be a stretch to say that she's one of the top Kentucky Oaks contenders at this point, because that entire picture looks really muddled right now. We haven't seen a whole lot of these fillies step forward. We'll talk about a few more of them later in this podcast. But a lot of them aren't running speed figures that are quite as high as the 111 that Donna Veloce got here. So she is one of the top contenders for that race at this point in time.
Yeah, and what I really liked, the half mile was quick. We have it in red. I think it was north of 130, and she was just a length and a half off of that. So she was moving, and she really finished off the race well. So I've got nothing but positives for her.
Let's move back to Florida, Tampa Bay Downs, where they ran a few undercard stakes races on that Tampa Bay Derby card. The Grade 2 Hillsborough was one of the top ones that they carded before the Tampa Bay Derby, and Starship Jubilee. I feel like I'm kind of running out of adjectives to describe her at this point. I mean, she just is a win machine. I think she's now won 5 of her last 6 races. She's won, I think, almost half of the starts in her career at this point, more on the turf. And she just always gets it done. Doesn't matter the trip, doesn't matter the pace setup. She just delivers.
She does. She got a 116 again for this win. I think it's the same thing she got last time and similar the time before that. She is just a really cool mare at the age of 7. I don't think she's a grade 1 type mare. She is kind of beaten up on some Chad Brown second string or third string horses. So not the strongest field, but hats off to her trainer, Kevin Attard. He keeps finding good spots for her. And I mean, this is a grade 2 race. It's not like it was some listed stakes race. You can only go against who shows up. So just a good story, not a horse I'm excited about. Usually when I see her in the entries, I figure it's a race I'm not going to bet because she usually towers over the field and she gets the job done. But it's just a fan of horses. I like watching her race.
Yeah, no, I agree with all of that. She's a horse that's been managed very well. They typically keep her pretty active through the winter when the racing is a little weaker, and she's made a lot of money doing that over these past few seasons. And this was another race that she just kind of towered over the field. Her main rival really coming in was Magic Star, who she had beaten in the past. And I know some people were upset about the ride that Magic Star got. I'm of the opinion that Magic Star just doesn't really have the turn of foot to get her out of trouble in a lot of these races. And that happened again here. She just always seems to have bad trips in these turf races. I'll say it again. I'd love to see Chad Brown run this horse going long on the dirt. She just has one of those, galloping strides like she's going to get as long as they write races. I'd love to see her in a race like the Delaware Handicap because she's really bred to be a dirt horse. She seems to train well on the dirt. She's not winning these turf races. It just would be nice to see them try something new with a horse who I do still think has some talent.
I'm going to make that note in my stable mail because I suspect at some point we will see that, and I want to remember it.
A race that I just read completely wrong on this Saturday card at Tampa Bay Downs was the Challenger, where I was pretty skeptical of the speed figure the Trophy Chaser got coming in to this race from that optional claiming race at Gulfstream last time. And he didn't quite run back to the figure that he got there, but in some ways he ran just as well because King for a Day seemed to have this race won at the top of the stretch. I mean, he got a perfect trip, stalking a moderate pace, had every right to just kick away from this field, and Trophy Chaser was just relentless in coming after him and nipped him on the wire.
Yeah, this wound up being a virtual match race. I mean, these two, there was a leader early, Admiralty Pier. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
So doing a better job than the announcer.
Yeah, I was going to say most people will probably get that joke. But Trophy Chaser and King for a Day always look like the two. King for a Day kind of got first run on him. He did take over outside while Trophy Chaser was a little bottled up. But once he got clear, it was just a match race through the lane. These two ran away from him. He got his neck up on the wire. They both got 119 TimeformUS speed figures for the win. The pace was pretty slow in here. All our fractions are coded in blue. It was one that started out really slow and just gradually got quicker throughout. I thought both of these two ran very well. There's no denying that. It was a promising effort for King for a Day, first time since last summer that we saw him. And Trophy Chaser just backed up that last race and seems like a really good horse right now. And just this was probably a strong race for grade 3, and I wouldn't be surprised if these guys can step up. To put it in perspective, the final time figure was higher than what we saw in the Santa Anita Handicap.
Yeah, I kind of had the same take on this race. I know it probably is not going to get that kind of attention, but Trophy Chaser has just really stepped forward and reformed himself from the one-turn horse that we thought he was last year. I mean, he's done it twice in a row now, so I have to become a believer. He's just this good. And I'm not down on King for a day at all, because he had shown this kind of potential last year, certainly in that Pegasus Stakes. And he got back to that level here. I thought this was a good effort from King for the day, even though he lost this race. And he seems like a horse that's not going to mind a little extra ground beyond this mile and a 16th. Whereas I'm not sure that really works for Trophy Chaser, even though he won going a mile and an eighth at his prior start. I don't know if more distance really helps him. But it was a fast race, so I'll be interested to see where these horses show up next because they seem to be in good form right now. The final stakes we'll talk about from Tampa Bay Downs last weekend was the Grade 3 Florida Oaks. Didn't come up as the fastest race, though I do think the winner of this race, Outburst, does have some talent. She unsurprisingly got bet down off that high morning line to be the 2-1 favorite in this race. And she changed up her running style. She had come from off the pace in her U.S. debut. She went straight to the front here and was actually pretty rank heading by the stands the first time into the first turn. But they settled her down, and she was able to hold off Walkin' Marrakesh, who also got a perfect trip, stalking on the rail the entire way. This one was dominated towards the front end.
It was. It was a solid effort by Outburst. I'll be honest, I was a little disappointed in the figure coming back at a 99, but I'm not convinced she's a horse that actually wants to be up on the front end. I think it was more a matter of circumstances, and she took advantage. I'm not going to be down on her too much. It was a nice call by you. Obviously, she got bet off the board. We must just have thousands and thousands of forecast listeners that are jumping on your picks based on a couple races we saw this week. But solid effort. She's a 3-year-old. She's going to need to do more to step up into better competition, but she's certainly a talented filly. And again, I'd prefer to see her come from a little off the pace. I think she'll run better that way, but you can't knock a rider for taking advantage of a situation like Javier Castellano did here.
Yeah, and I don't want to go too overboard on the also-rans because it wasn't a very fast race. But the one horse's trip you might want to go back and watch again is that of the number 1, Ivietsu, who just totally blew the star. It was way behind the field in the early going, and she made a big run to almost get up for third in this race while going wide. I've got to watch it back again. She might be a horse that I highlight on my horses to watch segment this week, but she's one that actually ran pretty well in defeat here. Let's stay in Florida and talk about one stakes race from Gulfstream Park. They ran a couple of sprints on the turf on Saturday, one for the Fillies in Marriage, which was won by the likable Girls Know Best. That race came up a little slower, though, than the one for the Colts and Geldings, the Silks Run, and that race was won by Karotari. Karotari's just a pretty fast horse for Brian Lynch. He seems to really have found his niche in this 5 and 5.5 furlong races, and he just ran this field off their feet.
Yeah, he just keeps running big races. He got a 119 TimeformUS speed figure for this win. He had run 120 when a runner-up last time and 120 the time before that in the win. So he's just a really solid 5-furlong sprinter right now. He beat up on Shecky Shabazz again. I imagine we're probably not going to be hearing much. That's a Jason Service trained horse who went down to defeat at 3-5 in this field. So he obviously didn't run well. But no knocks on Karatari at all. He is just a really solid sprinter in top form.
Yeah, I thought he was best in this race. I was kind of surprised he went off at 3-1 because he had beaten Shecky Shabazz in his prior start. I know some people thought Shecky Shabazz had a trip in that race, but Karotari has just been running solid races right along and winning races. So I was surprised that he was that price. The horse that maybe was a little unlucky was Aqueduct, who was third. He had a little trouble in the stretch in terms of finding a clear path to run through. But again, I mean, he's a Jorge Navarro horse, so I don't know what we'll get from him moving forward and which barn he'll even show up in. So the winner of this race, though, Karotari, is a horse that I think we'll be hearing more from in more of these short sprint races.
Yeah, he is. It's funny you mentioned Aragona. We're going to have some interesting discussions, I think, on the forecast coming up as some of these horses start showing up in different barns and different topic for a different day. But it's certainly something that's going to horse players are going to have to deal with for a while now. It's
a different topic for another day, and I don't want to go too much into it right now. But I do wonder as other trainers take over these horses and as kind of this whole scheme, I guess you call it, has been exposed, if certain trainers who might be caught up in something like this start to think twice about their activities, because I think this is a real wake-up call for a lot of people in the industry. And I wonder if we'll start to see some form reversals beyond just the horses trained by Jason Service and Jorge Navarro. It's something to be aware of. Let's close out this show by talking about a couple of stakes races from Oaklawn Park on Saturday. These are races that I know I wasn't aware of at the time because there was so much racing going on elsewhere. I went back and watched the replays in retrospect. We saw an Oaks prep in the Grade 3 Honeybee. I don't think any of these horses are going to be considered the top Kentucky Oaks contenders, but She Dares the Devil, who won this race, she was game to come through a tight opening in mid-stretch and get the victory here. And it's not like her speed figure is that much lower than some of the others we've been seeing.
No, she got a 105 for the win, just a few points below some others. She'd obviously need to make a jump to compete with some of the West Coast horses, even somebody like Harvey's Little Goyle we saw at Aqueduct. I forget who it was at Gulfstream that ran a nice race. So, I would say these are probably a step below. The Honeybee's just a Grade 3. So, I think we got a Grade 3 performance. Beyond the winner, I don't think there's a whole lot going forward. I think the winner was probably clearly the best in here. She didn't have a whole lot of pace to run into, and she still was able to run down Alta's Award, who actually went off favored in here. So not the strongest of race, but if I did want one out of here, it is the winner. She Dares the Devil.
I do not disagree with that. I don't have a whole lot to add about the race. The other fillies, they don't seem like they're going to be advancing to be top Kentucky Oaks contenders, but I do think that She Dares the Devil ran pretty well and showed some characteristics that you want to see as horses move on to tougher races. Final race we'll discuss on this podcast was the race they ran right before the Honeybee. That was the Hot Springs. And Whitmore, who won this race, just seems to have a stranglehold on this particular affair. This was the 4th year in a row that he won the Hot Springs. Just a horse that loves Oaklawn Park, loves the 6 furlong distance, and he got the perfect trip in this race.
It did. The pace was a bit slow. We have all the fractions in blue, and I do think it had an effect on the overall figure. Whitmore got a 114 for the win, which was still much the best in the race. In a race he won by 2.5 lengths. The final time figure was a 119. But again, for people who maybe aren't as familiar as some others with our numbers, we do that because if you don't, you tend to overrate a lot of the also rans. It's easy to look at the running line and see that Whitmore probably could have run better than the 114. I don't think many people are going to bet him next time out expecting a 114. But if you look through our charts, you'll see why. If you just arbitrarily say, the pace killed this race, I'm going to knock it up, you wind up overrating some horses, and I think that can be a bit dangerous. But that said, I did like what Whitmore showed. He came back. He looked as good as ever. It was his second start of the year. He had run second to Share the Upside, who I just didn't run much at all in here. But I really liked the gameness he showed. He actually had to squeeze through some horses. He didn't have much of a hole. He was trapped in behind that slow pace. And he just showed what a professional he is. As soon as he got a small seam, his rider, Joe Talamo, just kind of stuck his nose in there and he went right through, which is something you'll see. Not all horses want to do that, but a professional like Whitmore is going to take advantage, and just a good effort from him.
I know a lot of us think about Whitmore as this closing sprinter, but he does have a lot more tactical speed than I think he gets credit for at times. And he showed that in this race. But when they moderate the pace a little bit and go slower up front, he can be right up in there and behind the leaders. And it just put him in the perfect spot to take advantage when Share the Upside kind of backed up at the top of the stretch and opened up that space for him to run through. And he's just such a strong finisher. He just powers home in these races. And it's a cool thing to see when he's able to do it against a field that he can beat. Share the Upside we had talked about last time. He's a horse that can post these gigantic speed figures when he has a clear lead. When he doesn't have a clear lead, he's just not the same animal. And that was the case here, as Mr. Jägermeister was just faster in the early going, and Share the Upside couldn't stalk and be nearly as effective. What you said about the speed figure for Whitmore, I agree 100%. I would evaluate him more on his final time speed figure, or even the one that he earned in his race last time, because he's shown that he's that kind of horse, and he ran well to win this race. You just can't earn a higher TimeformUS speed figure for all the reasons that you stated when they go that slowly up front.
Yeah, and it's a good point you make about his early speed, because he's actually a horse that went head and head for a while with Matoli last year in a race that was a virtual match race to Count Fleet. So when he had to do it, he can show it. It's not his favorite style, but he definitely has more early speed than people give him credit for.
That's all the racing to recap this week. As always, you can listen to both of our podcasts on Tuesdays and Fridays when we do some handicapping on the TimeformUS Forecast. You can listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Forum channel. Craig, great to talk about these races with you this week and some of the events from the past week, and I'm sure we'll do more of that moving forward. And we'll be back again on Friday to handicap the upcoming weekend's races, which I believe will include the Major Derby Prep at Oaklawn, the Rebel Stakes. So look forward to all of that. Talk later in the week.